Israel-Palestine issue is something of an IQ test. It requires a lot of intelligence, brains, and nuance to understand it. Because, you can have your average TV celebrity and whatever come out, and Twitter celebrity come out and tweet banal inanities on the subject without understanding head or tail of what they're saying. I can show you videos. I would urge all your viewers to go check out the videos of what happened after that, when Hamas was literally taking out Fatah, that is to say PLO operative in Gaza. They were putting tires around their neck and burning them. They were throwing them off buildings. They were gutting their intestines. God knows what else they were doing to those people. That is how they run a polity. And who are they shooting rockets at? They're not targeting Israeli service people. They're just targeting whoever the rockets can land on. It's outright a war crime. It's the very definition of a war crime.
And, Jews just being attacked for wearing a kippah, not even holding an Israeli flag, just coming out of the metro. And Borgen came out of the metro wearing a kippah with his hands in the pocket, and he was pummeled and beaten and spray painted.
That anti-Semitism is still alive and well in so many parts of the world, in so many cultures, including in our own country.
There is also a huge moral difference between what Israel is doing and what Hamas is doing. Israel calls you up and tells you, look, we're going to bomb this building. We don't want innocent civilians to get killed. Please get out. They don't care if terrorists are not dying. They're more concerned about protecting civilians. So, Israel actually cares more about the Palestinian people than Hamas does.
People are so wound up in this bizarre narrative that has no relation to the reality of a country that is under attack and is defending itself against attack, has developed the sophisticated systems to defend itself because it has had to defend itself because terrorists are constantly attacking it. We need more people to stand up in the Human Rights Council and in other forums and saying, I'm sorry, if we're talking about war crimes, let's talk about where this started. It started with Hamas. It's not Israel's commission of war crimes. That's nonsense. Israel's defending itself as any state would under attack. The president of Turkey invoking the worst kind of blood libel against Jews just a week or so ago. Really a blood-curdling statement by the president of that country. A disease that hasn't been defeated through many centuries. But it's Hamas that caused this destruction. It's Hamas that is responsible for the deaths on both sides of this conflict, and that must be identified clearly, boldly.
Jain friends, you're watching the Offence, and I'm Vaibhav. Today we are joined by two guests from United States who are part of American Jewish community. American Jewish Committee is a Jewish organization, which is an advocacy group, which looks after the interests of Jews around the world. So I would like to say thanks to them that they agreed to do this, and also Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, our very own Abhijit Iyer-Mitra. So I welcome you all, and I say thank you to all of you that you agreed to do this. So my first point on which I would like to start the discussion is we have seen recently that what Hamas has done, and we were not surprised by people who are into the strategic and security affairs, who keep a watch, who understand Hamas, who know their character. They don't believe in humanity. They have got nothing to do with human values. The civilized world. War is an economy for them. But still, we saw that when Israel responded, a lot of people jump in whenever such thing happens. They start blaming the Israel. They don't blame Hamas. They don't blame the terrorist organizations. They always blame Israel. So from where does this, this sort of subtle anti-Semitism come from? Because if Jews are doing something, it must be wrong. This is what the mindset is. So I would like to start with Jason. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity, first of all, to talk about this situation. And second of all, for the really refreshing perspective you've offered. I say refreshing because I hear it too seldom in comments from media and from analysts and from politicians around the world. And it's so important that our friends in India understand the nature of Hamas, the nature of the threat that Israel faces, the intentions of the people of Israel to provide for their own defense by themselves, to push back against the forces of terror and extremism that unfortunately are on their border. So understanding the true threat posed by Hamas, an organization that would wipe out Israel if it had the chance, that is supported by the most negative elements in the region, particularly by Iran, also significant assistance from Qatar, political assistance from Turkey, but an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood that wants to establish an Islamist state from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, does not accept Israel's right to exist. And so on at least 4 occasions in the last 13 years has committed acts of terror against Israel, sent barrages of rockets toward Israeli cities and towns, killing Israelis, and requiring a self-defensive response by Israel. And it's always a terrible ordeal for the people of Gaza, the Palestinians who are under the control of this Hamas Islamist regime. And so there is suffering and destruction on a massive scale. And that's something that the region has to deal with now. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel today and is dealing with this issue with Israeli and Palestinian interlocutors. And the international community will do what it can to try to rebuild. But it's Hamas that caused this destruction. It's Hamas that is responsible for the deaths on both sides of this conflict, and that must be identified clearly, boldly, unequivocally, as you have just done. And so I thank you again. If I just return to that initial point that I was making.
Abhijit, I would like to ask you the same question. Whenever we talk about Hamas, not many people know what that organization is made of. What is the potential of that organization? There was a time when Hamas used to get support majorly from Arab countries. Recently, we have seen they have started collaborating with Iran, and Iran has been providing them with, even in the recent conflict, Iran was providing them with the rockets. And those rockets were either being produced in Iran, or the technical know-how was provided to Hamas to make it, in Gaza. So, first, I want you to discuss a little on this. And second point, how far do you think people go, and why do they do that to support Hamas in the name of supporting Israeli Palestinians?
So, first of all, we need to commiserate with the Palestinians because they are the biggest and most violent victims of Hamas. Nobody has brutalized and killed the Palestinians the way Hamas has over these past 10, 15 years, right? First. Second, as somebody explained it to me, Israel-Palestine issue is something of an IQ test. It requires a lot of intelligence, brains, and nuance to understand it, because you can have your average TV celebrity and whatever come out, and Twitter celebrity come out and tweet banal inanities on the subject without understanding head or tail of what they're saying. So and unfortunately, the kind of society we are, it's these kind of bleeding heart, clueless campaigns that make a lot of impact. But let's deal with the facts first of all. Hamas is so violent and so anti-Palestinian that none of the other states, Arab states, are willing to deal with it. Only isolated or highly revisionist states like Qatar, like Iran, or Turkey are willing to deal with it. All the other Arab states, the moment that Palestinian unity was broken, remember, after Hamas won that election in 2005, I think it was, they effectively bifurcated the Palestinian state. I can show you videos. I would urge all your viewers to go check out the videos of what happened after that, when Hamas was literally taking out Fatah, that is to say PLO operatives in Gaza. They were putting tires around their neck and burning them. They were throwing them off buildings. They were gutting their intestines. God knows what else they were doing to those people. That is how they run a polity. It is a fascist military dictatorship that they run out there, where any signs of political disagreement with them are dealt with in an extremely harsh way. Death, usually. I mean, forget harsh. So it is a borderline psychotic organization. We need to remember that bestowing any kind of legitimacy on them is absolute rubbish. Now, let's talk about the legal points involved out here. Palestine is effectively a partitioned state. There is the West Bank under the PLO, and there is Gaza under Hamas. Gaza is not occupied. There is not 1 square inch of Gaza that is occupied at the moment. So any clause of self-defense that you can claim that Gaza has doesn't apply to them. You don't have the right to go around shooting rockets. And who are they shooting rockets at? They're not targeting Israeli service people. They're just targeting whoever the rockets can land on. It's outright a war crime. It's the very definition of a war crime, right? So there's this. There is also a huge moral difference between what Israel is doing and what Hamas is doing. Israel calls you up and tells you, look, we're going to bomb this building. We don't want innocent civilians to get killed. Please get out. They don't care if terrorists are not dying. They're more concerned about protecting civilians. So, Israel actually cares more about the Palestinian people than Hamas does. They use their own. There is not a single war crime in the textbook of war crimes that Hamas is not guilty of. And it tells you a lot about society in general, that Hamas has somehow seen as heroes of some kind. It's a tribute to the dumbing down of society. And unfortunately, it is, there is a lot of, these hints. As Mark Twain used to say, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And what you see today is the modern version of blood libel and anti-Semitism. It's more sophisticated, it's more nuanced, but it's just the same crude kind of bigotry that you see in a different form.
Thank you, Abhijit. Now I'll be going to Nissim. Nissim, you have been a great advocate of India-Israel ties, and we recently have seen that the ties have grown stronger. Even during this recent conflict, we saw overwhelming support from the Indian masses. Indian people stood up for Israel. The majority of Indians, they ran campaigns, on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, and on all the social media platforms, and they voiced their support. And India has been a country where Jews have lived without any sort of anti-Semitism. So I would like to request you to dwell upon this. That during such conflict, what do you think should have been the stand of Indian government, first of all, and secondly, how do you feel when such overwhelming support comes from society?
Thank you, Vaibhav, for having me. Thank you, Abhijit, an old friend, to reconnect with you, and of course, my mentor, Mr. Jason Isaacson. I have, in the last 2 weeks, I have had a front row seat in witnessing and cajoling Indian American brothers and sisters in standing up for Israel. On May 13th, at the Northbrook Synagogue in Illinois, there was a rally in support of Israel when Israel was bombarded by rockets. And about 30 Indian Americans in the middle of the week drove up from Chicago to Northbrook and stood with Indian Israeli flags. They stood with photographs of Sandia Mitra, the Indian nanny that was killed by Hamas rockets in Ashkelon. Later on May 16th, Dr. Bharat Barai, a highly respected Indian American leader and an alum of AJC Project Interchange, and Vandana Jingan, another alum, led about 35 Indian Americans on a Sunday morning for a solidarity vigil outside the Israeli consulate building in Chicago, and presented a letter of support to Deputy Consul General Ariel Arada. Last Sunday, just day before yesterday, Indian Americans drove from the neighboring cities to Milwaukee to stand in support with Israel. And I will share those photographs with you. And just yesterday, I was proud to lead an Indian American delegation in support of Israel to the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. So, and this came out, this support was genuine. I could see from the heart, talking about not against the Palestinians, but standing in support of Israel, especially in this battle where Israeli civilians were targeted indiscriminately. And Hamas was creating a double war crime, firing missiles from civilian areas into Israeli civilian areas. And just today morning, I saw Indrani Bakchi's headline article in the Times of India that India's stance vis-a-vis Israel at the United Nations has shifted for the better. So that's a wonderful development for Indian Americans and our Jewish friends in the diaspora to note. And again, our communities, thanks to Jason's leadership, we have been advocating jointly on Capitol Hill. When I newly joined AJC, I was privileged to help Jason put together the first US-India-Israel program partnership event on Capitol Hill, women in saris, men in kippas. It was 500 people at that event. And then over the years, we have done similar events. We do Hanukkah in Indian Jewish tradition, showcasing our proud 2,000-year-old Jewish heritage. And we proudly say that as an Indian Jew, we never faced anti-Semitism in our 2,000-year history. So that goes to, and I'm sure most people who know our community know that our synagogues are located in Muslim-majority neighborhoods in Kolkata, in Mumbai, in Ahmedabad, in Pune, and Cochin, and in Delhi, in Khan Market. And never a stone was thrown at our synagogue. That goes to show that there is something about the Indian people of all faiths very good. So thank you so much. Jason.
Yeah, so thank you. If I could just pick up on something that my colleague Nissim just said, and also what was said earlier about the growing relationship between India and Israel, which is of such importance and so encouraging to see and to feel that we have contributed to it over the last several decades. On Thursday in Geneva, the UN Human Rights Council will be taking up a resolution condemning Israel in the Human Rights Council, a resolution that, at least according to the text that I saw earlier this week, did not reference Hamas, did not reference the war crimes that Abhijit was just talking about. And I'm hoping that Friends of Israel will find ways of standing up, pushing back against that language, pushing back against the repeated abuses of the human rights mechanisms to target Israel in this one-sided fashion, which happens again and again and again in a variety of UN settings. India has proven again and again its friendship to Israel in very practical ways, and I'm hoping that that on this opportunity and on other opportunities to come, there will be further evidence of that friendship and solidarity that India has demonstrated toward its friend Israel.
Can I just add something, Vaibhav?
Yeah, please go on.
So, I think Nissim and Jason are being far too kind to India. I think, there's a huge number of Indians on Twitter and God knows where else who are absolutely furious at the kind of monkey balancing that the Indian government tries to pull off, especially given that we suffer from the exact same situation as Israel, being a victim of terrorism. And, imagine if somebody had said, during the time of Balakot, that the suicide bombing attack was an unfortunate incident and the sovereignty of borders must be respected and all that nonsense. So I think it's had an effect. I don't think the government was prepared for the kind of pushback that they got on this from their own supporters mostly. And that's very good. It shows you that the primary wellspring of support for Israel in India lies with the Indian people. Second, a lot of the government decisions on Israel seem to be based on unproven, undocumented statistics. That somehow there's a great deal of, empathy for Palestinians. Have you ever seen mass protests anytime anything has happened in Gaza or Jerusalem out here? Never. Have you ever seen, at most, I've seen Indian Muslim gatherings with 10 people, 15 people, 25 people. And 25 would be a world record in terms of a gathering of, pro-Palestinians in Delhi. And we're meant to believe that somehow the government supporting Israel at the UN would endanger this vote bank of people. It's a joke. So there's obviously a major disconnect between the government and its supporters that it needs to fix. And, I think a lot of us have taken it upon ourselves to hold the government to account for the things that we expect as supporters of what its foreign policy line needs to be, especially with regards to Israel.
I think my next question was something very similar to what you were saying. There were two parts to it. First, I would like to pick up from where Jason left. That we see that whenever any such conflict in Middle East takes place, especially between Israel and Hamas, resolutions start going in Human Rights Council, United Nations Security Council. We recently saw that International Court of Justice got involved, and they started issuing letters and notices to start serving notices to Israel, to which the Israeli defense minister came on public and he gave a very befitting reply. And to be just to be on record, I'm a great admirer of that speech that he gave to the world, and he told the world that what are the values behind which the Israeli defense forces stand. And so my two parts of my question: first, what do you think about these resolutions which come against Israel? Second, what do you have to say about the narrative which is often played on mainstream media against Israel, especially the kinds of Al Jazeera of the world? They start running, and to be honest, those news channels are filled with people who are, anti-Semitism is enshrined to their personality.
Look, I've been spending the last couple of weeks watching a great deal of foreign media, BBC among the various media that I've been monitoring, and of course many on social media also who have picked up on the disproportionate number of casualties, for instance, between the Palestinians and Israelis. And it's true. Israel has the Iron Dome defensive system, and the Hamas rockets sometimes fall within Gaza itself, killing Palestinians. Israel has precisely targeted Hamas missile launchers and weapons depots and the tunnels in which they're stored. And there has been a disproportionate number of casualties, but that's not a reason to condemn Israel or to say that therefore more Jews should have died. Otherwise, this is an unfair conflict. People are so wound up in this bizarre narrative that has no relation to the reality of a country that is under attack and is defending itself against attack, has developed the systems, the sophisticated systems to defend itself because it has had to defend itself because terrorists are constantly attacking it. But in order to defend its own population, it has developed the Iron Dome system with assistance from the United States, I should point out, financial assistance. And if you are going after missile launchers and weapons depots in a densely populated area where they are placed specifically for the reason of using Palestinian population as human shields, specifically for the reason of raising the casualty count when Israel necessarily responds in its self-defense. This is the nature of the math that we are facing, the equation that we are facing, and the cynical exploitation by Hamas of these facts is just feeds into or is absorbed, is permeating the media that we are seeing around the world. So we see it in the social media, we see it on the mainstream media, and of course we see it coming from a variety of human rights related non-governmental organizations. we do what we can to present the facts, to present reality. Our government, the American government, has been very clear in ascribing the blame for this latest round of violence and previous rounds of violence to Hamas. Not all governments have been quite so clear. We hope that more will be, and that when international forums take up such questions, they will look at the facts. Now, we saw early on in this conflict, the Arab League foreign ministers had a meeting and they called for an ICC war crimes investigation. The ICC prosecutor indicated that there would be some kind of a further war crimes investigation. But what we need is more people to stand up and say, hold on, there were war crimes and they were committed by Hamas, as Abhijit said very clearly at the beginning of this conversation. We need more people to stand up in the Human Rights Council and in other forums and saying, I'm sorry, if we're talking about war crimes, let's talk about where this started. It started with Hamas. It's not Israel's commission of war crimes. That's nonsense. Israel's defending itself as any state would under attack. So I think that this is the conversation we will be having, I'm afraid, for weeks. I'm hoping that we don't keep having this conversation year after year. The world needs to wake up, and we are doing what we can to present these facts to the public.
My next question is to you. You haven't talked about the so-called human rights organizations and groups. I believe these organizations, majority of them are human rights organizations. They are groups which are paid to do a certain job, and they do it because for that is what they are paid for. So my question to you is, how powerful do you think these organizations are, and does the world needs to wake up and take a call against, because we see many such organizations here in India as well. I mean, they don't see what crimes done by the like if Pakistan army in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, they fire rockets from the areas which are heavily populated by the civilians living in the Pakistan Kashmir. And when Indian government responds, they immediately get a victim and the so-called shaheed. You manufacture shaheed overnight. So and it catches eyeballs, global eyeballs. Human rights organization. The same trick is used by Palestine, Hamas in Gaza. So what do you think is the right approach to go about dealing with such groups, or the strategy which is used by organizations like Hamas and Pak Army?
Look, initially, a lot of these NGOs, you could say, were necessary, that they plugged the loops where government policy won't get. The little cracks where government policy didn't enter, they were meant to sort of fill the gaps out there, draw attention to that fact. The problem is, what we've seen is there's been this huge blossoming of NGOs. And the only way NGOs can make money, get funding, is to exaggerate and hyperbolize every single claim. It is absolutely necessary for funding that when you're competing in a crowded marketplace, you have to exaggerate and get attention. So there's a lot of hyperbolization that goes on of every single problem. It's like if there is one problem, there are usually 100 NGOs to deal with it. And so the narrative gets magnified almost 1,000-fold. It's almost like a competitive kabuki theater, Japanese style kabuki theater, where everything has to be exaggerated quite significantly. Now, in the midst of all of this, the problem has become that NGOs have become a sort of revolving door to both government and to think tanks. Before, it used to be think tanks and government. Now it's think tank, NGO, and government. And the problem there is, what you're seeing is a kind of intellectual tyranny, a zeitgeist almost, where you have to conform to certain shibboleths, or otherwise you are persona non grata. So what's happening is, you find this so often, the UN Economic and Social Welfare Council, I forget the name, they've got so many word soup organizations, but this was a UN organization. They came up with this thing, a report saying, Israel is an apartheid state. We've done a study about it. You actually go just 10 pages. I mean, forget reading the whole report. In the first 10 pages, you can see all the methodological errors and things like that out there. It wasn't even worth the paper that it was written on. And this is the kind of, this atmosphere of fear, almost this Stalinist thought control. It isn't official, unlike Stalinism, it's unofficial. But there are career consequences to you for not abiding by it. They produced this report. It was such a joke of the report that the UN had to, even a UN where Iran and China get elected to the UN Human Rights Council, had to distance itself from the report and trash that report. Then who can forget the Justice Goldstone Commission, where he himself had to admit that he got the terms of reference wrong. He got most of his methodologies and everything wrong. So, it's at one point they were very important. I think their value now is it's the law of diminishing returns happening out here, because they've essentially become a sort of a compliance and control mechanism. And that's very, very dangerous, because it's essentially quackery masquerading around as academic rigor.
Next question to Nissim. Nissim, I would like to, we all know that if there is one country in the Middle East which needs peace more than anybody else, that country is Israel. Because if we just look at the recent conflict, the rockets which were, and Abhijit can shed more light on that when he speaks next. One rocket which was fired by Hamas, costed around $300, 300 US dollars, and one Iron Dome missile which was used to counter it, around $80,000. So that was a huge difference. So war costs a lot of money for Israel. And Israel respects its citizens and human lives, the lives of the Israelis, just like any civilized country or society does. But still, there is always a narrative which is being pushed that, Israel is the one which has to be blamed for all the conflicts in the Middle East. You see conspiracy theories being peddled by influential people on social media, people which, with millions of followings, they tell these lies. So why do you think such kind of things happen, and how does it impact you as a Jew living in America or Europe or wherever? I mean, how do you feel about it?
It's everything regarding the question you asked. For a start, when Israel withdrew from Gaza, the former president of World Bank, James Wolfenson, an Australian Jew, put in $500,000 of his own money and raised about $7-8 million to buy the greenhouses from the Israeli families that will live in Gaza, and hoping that this will become a great exporter of agro and fruit produce, great exporter of stitched clothes, sort of mini Singapore, Hong Kong of the Middle East. And look where Hamas has brought it today. For many, the people in the majority, a lot of people love to present Israel in a very negative light. But for us in India and many countries in Asia and many countries in Africa, we have seen the goodwill, the goodness of Israel. Israel has centers of excellence, that agro and dairy farming centers of excellence that train Indian farmers, grassroots people in all the states of India, in many states, in many countries around Asia and other places. Does the European and the Western media highlight this? Never. Have they seen how much Israeli expertise, with the little funding that they have, how much good they're able to do? No. But it's an industry that presents Israel in the negative light. And if you permit me, and I can delve into something that we diaspora Indians are facing on or similar track, may I do that? Can I have the liberty to do that? Recently, we heard the unfortunate comments of the Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi peddling anti-Semitic theories about Jews and money and Jews having influence in the media, and she got a strong pushback. Now, when leaders world leaders like this promote these theories. I believe in the United Nations speech on the Israel-Palestine conflict during the Israel-Hamas war, he also mentioned, he warned Europe that there are 65 million Muslims immigrants in your midst. And if you do not solve the Palestinian issue, you're going to face consequences. What do you mean by consequences? Those consequences are faced by the minority Jewish communities who are attacked, whose synagogues are spray painted, whose members are attacked on the streets of Paris, in London, in New York. We saw a city that is the global capital of the world in commerce, has Jews just being attacked for wearing a kippah, not even holding an Israeli flag, just coming out of the metro. And Borgen came out of the metro wearing a kippah with his hands in the pocket, and he was pummeled and beaten and spray painted, mace painted. That goes to show how much hate there is and how much work our governments in Western nations need to do to ensure protection of all communities. I do not say do not protest against Israel, but to pile up and beat up on Jews because just they are Jews, that is terrible. To some extent, we Indian diaspora members have also faced this. We have heard many incidents when Indians peacefully celebrating Independence Day at the Indian High Commission in London were pelted with rotten eggs and tomatoes. Now that is something, and for vegetarian Indians, that's a big, to have eggs splashed over your body. That goes to show how much. Now, I have never heard of a Jewish diaspora member going and pelting stones or beating up other members of other diasporas. And I have never heard Indian Americans going and beating up people. So I would say learn from our Jewish and Indian diasporas. Thank you.
Come back to this about the anti-Semitic statements given by the foreign minister of Pakistan recently on CNN, I guess that the channel was. And but we have grown listening to such anti-Semitic statements by Pakistani ministers, preachers, influential celebrities. I mean, my favorite one is that New World Order is a New World Order. So this is a conspiracy theory that floated from Pakistan, and we have grown up listening to such theories. So when you are based in America, you are an advocacy group for the interest of Jews. How much anti-Semitism do you think still exists in Western society? I'm not talking about the East. Even in the so-called developed countries of Europe, North America, South America, how much anti-Semitism do you see still persists in these regions?
Thank you for the question. It's growing. It's so horrific that three quarters of a century after the Holocaust, the absolute nadir of humanity, that anti-Semitism is still alive and well in so many parts of the world, in so many cultures, including in our own country. There are attacks, as Nissim was just describing, Jews coming out of metros in New York or sitting at an outside restaurant in Los Angeles or in other places, and synagogues being defaced, and in Europe as well and elsewhere. And it's an ongoing issue in South America as well. You had the president of Turkey invoking the worst kind of blood libel against Jews just a week or so ago. Really blood-curdling statement by the president of that country. So this is a disease that hasn't been defeated through many centuries. It is sometimes in recession, not now, unfortunately. The United States has laws, anti-hate laws. We just passed a very important No Hate Act in Congress. It was signed into law by President Biden just last week. AJC had an active role in working on that in partnership with Asian Americans as well, who have been subject to hate crimes. prejudice of all kinds, and violence. But this is an ongoing battle in our country and around the world. And we push back against prejudice in every possible way, in government bodies, in private institutions. That's why we have an advocacy network that includes our 24 offices across the United States and our 12, soon to be 13 offices overseas. That's why we develop the kind of partnerships that we have developed with sister communities, especially in the United States, the Indian American community. And we will continue to do so to create a common front against bigotry, against hate, against anti-Semitism and all bigotries. But it is an ongoing battle.
Ask you that when we talk about the role of Iran in destabilizing the whole Middle East, we have seen Iran's role in arming and supplying weapons to Hamas, any country which stands up against Israel, or any country or any leadership which stands for democratic values, human values, we see that Iran starts playing a role, in disturbing that in the region. Even in India, we have seen in the past attacks nearby the Israeli High Commission or embassy has been had links to Hezbollah. But we don't see that the Indian people, Indian media, they don't discuss Iran with the kind of country that it is, that the kind of regime that which believes in death and destruction. They don't believe in human values. I mean, the most vile kind of people are in that country, and the biggest victims of Khamenei's rule are Iranians themselves, just like, in Gaza, like biggest victims of Hamas are Palestinians. So why don't our media or media in Europe or other parts, they don't talk about Iran so much? And kindly shed light on what all Iran has done and why is Iran so evil?
Okay. Look, I have lots of family around Tehran. Wonderful country, wonderful people. The issue is they have a leadership that no country deserves. I won't wish that kind of leadership on my worst enemy. Remember, this was a country which in 1979 had a higher per capita income than South Korea and Taiwan, and was on the cusp of full-blown industrialization, which would have made it a leading industrial power. And it had excellent relations at that point of time, both with Israel and with Egypt. It had mended fences with Egypt, and was one of the few countries that was trying to rehabilitate Egypt after the Arab League kicked it out for its peace deal with Israel. All of a sudden, this so-called Islamic revolution happens, and it completely destroys the Iranian Renaissance. In those days, Iran was the primary American ally. It was not Saudi Arabia. It was none of the Gulf states. It was Iran. And all of a sudden, this country, which was destined, as its history decides, for greatness, is reduced to a minor reactionary power that is at war with literally every single one of its neighbors. Tell me one country around Iran where it hasn't committed aggression, supported terrorism, or supported some kind of government coup or something like that. All right. They attempted this in Bahrain. They've been trying this in Kuwait. Iraq, of course, very well known. The UAE, they've been trying destabilization. All around the neighborhood, they've been trying destabilization. I think the issue that we don't talk about, the reason why we don't talk about Iran specifically in India, is because what Iran does seldom affects us specifically. For example, in Kashmir or things like that, there's only been one Shia terrorist who's ever been caught. In the other parts of India, the only Shia terror we've seen has been the attack on the Israeli attaché, outside the Israeli embassy in 2009 or 13, was it? And as a rule, India is the second biggest Shia country on earth after Iran. The second largest population of Shias. But also remember, the Shias are economically very, very well to do in India. They don't fall so easily for identity politics. Tell me, how many Shia protests have you seen in favor of Khomeini, or people like that? So even within the Shias, you have the Dawoodi Bohras, the Ismailis, and all of that, who are extremely rich. They are.
We saw many protests when Qasem Soleimani died.
Yes, when Qasim Soleimani died. Exactly. And so now, even within the Shia, a large bulk of them are non-Jafri, so non-Twelver Shias. And the Twelver Shias are probably the most economic depressed of all the Shias in India, even though they are significantly higher than the Sunnis in terms of per capita income. So where you see these protests are actually very niche areas around Lucknow and Kargil in north of in northern Jammu and Kashmir, where I've actually covered this in great detail in the print. There are lots of pictures when you go to Kargil. When Article 370 was abrogated, there were lots of pictures of Qasim Soleimani and Hassan Nasrallah and things like that in Kargil. But again, they protest, but they don't do anything more than protest. So it's never been high on the Indian terror radar for there to be any great reportage.
But my question was the part of my question I would like you to answer that how destructive role can Iran actually play in the region, and how is it managing to do it? Because we have seen Iran's role increasing in the region. It hasn't even after the death of Qasim Soleimani, we have seen Iran indulging more into power politics, whether and attacks on. We have seen the support for Houthis and attacks on oil wells of Aramco in Saudi Arabia. We have seen their stronghold in Lebanon. They literally run that country. So, and even in Syria.
So what you find with Iran is it's the classic response of a country that is too scared or does not have the conventional military capability to do things. Like, there was that famous general who told Benazir Bhutto, madam, terrorism, 1,000 terrorists equals 10,000 troops in an armored brigade at no extra cost to the Pakistani taxpayer. That is the mentality that Iran has with regards to all these places. They will fight to the last Lebanese Shia. They will fight to the last Iraqi Shia. And they will expend very few Iranians on it. So it's a fantastic way of riling up a population, providing them with false hope and things like that. The problem is, at some point, to shore up your credibility, you have to start putting in money and troops, which they've been doing, and they've been bleeding Iran white. I think people don't cover this, but a lot of the protests when Ahmadinejad was in power, a lot of the slogans that were being carried out were slogans like, how are you sending $2 billion to Hezbollah when we don't have enough food to eat on our tables? So there's a lot of anger within Iran about things like this. If you go to the Martyrs Cemetery opposite Ayatollah Khomeini's grave outside Tehran, Ayatollah Khomeini's tomb outside Tehran, there is a systematic effort to hide the number of bodies coming back from Syria. We found so many labels where you had to look, where they had actually exhumed older bodies from the Iran-Iraq war and things like that, buried them under there, and literally tried to, downplay the number. They still have to be glorified as Shaheed, but the numbers have to be downplayed. They're paying an extremely heavy price, and this is what a weak country does when it's more concerned about regime stability. The only aim of the Iranian regime is not the well-being of the Iranian people, it is the well-being of the Iranian regime, which can only do through creating perpetual external war to divert attention. So you can always have emergency laws and throw people into jail for treason, whatever. It's exactly what Hamas does. Hamas in that sense is a mini ayatollahship. Or Iran is a large-scale Hamas dictatorship, whatever you want to call it. Other than the fact one is Sunni and one is Shia, the regime policies are exactly the same. Keep your people in a perpetual state of siege and essentially just destroy your own country. And Hamas is no different. You've seen the latest report today where they were digging up water pipes meant to supply fresh water to their own people to make rockets. That's how cynical these people are. There's nothing you can do about it.
Now we'll go ahead with the closing remarks. I would like each one of you to give your closing remarks on one. the way forward? What do you think is the way forward? And second, about India-Israel ties, and to which AJC has been a great advocate, and AJC has worked a lot to. Jason himself personally has always been involved to advocate, Israeli and Indian ties. So I'll start with Nissim with you. That what are your closing remarks?
Thank you. I would only say, sitting here in the diaspora, there is a tremendous opportunity for growth of the bond between the Jewish and Indian diasporas. I have been, thanks to AGC's platform since 2002, I have been able to help build a robust partnership between the Jewish and Indian American diasporas. We were 1 million before 2000. Today we are 4 million. And there are another 4 million on work visas, student visas, academic visas, who will become American citizens in the next 10 years. So we will be 8 million. And advocates for, and 90, almost, the support for Israel is like 95%, 90% of our community is very solidly pro-Israel. So there's the goodwill and new friends for Israel just keep growing. And all I have to do as a Gujarati Jew, Jewish American, Indian American, is to trade on the goodwill between the Jewish and Indian communities. And I am hoping that in the near future, I will be able to bring this partnership model to other countries like Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia, where there are significant Jewish communities and quite large Indian diasporas. I think it will benefit our communities mutually on domestic issues like immigrations, fighting hate crimes. It will benefit our communities internationally, is promoting ties between our adopted homeland, the United States or Canada, UK, Australia, Israel, and India. So I only see opportunities going forward. Thank you, Vaibhav and Abhijit and Jason.
Thank you, Jason. Your remarks.
Thank you very much. If I can just follow on what Nissim was just saying, but first take a moment just to praise Nissim for what he has done over the many years to so significantly strengthen Indian-American understanding and friendship, and of course, Indian-Israeli friendship and cooperation. And no one has played a more critical role in that on the ground here in the United States. So I'm so glad that you made the trip and that you stayed and that you have contributed so significantly to both of these very important initiatives. I think what I'd also say is, just to the larger discussion that we're having, if the resources and energy that have been devoted to propaganda against Israel, to political mobilizing against Israel by Arab diaspora communities, by people in political factions in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere, if those resources and that energy were devoted instead to seizing the opportunities that exist for Palestinians, encouraging business cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis, which opportunities are blocked by Palestinian leadership, unfortunately, to encouraging Palestinian leadership to come back to the bargaining table, to negotiate peace, a settlement with Israel, so that Palestinian rights could be assured and security can be assured, as well as Israel's security can be assured. We'd be in a very different world than we are in now. And until that transition takes place, until there is a devotion to building peace and cooperation between Israel and all of its neighbors, reaching out to the outstretched hand of Israel that wants peace, that depends on peace with its neighbors, that is doing what it can to build peace with as many of its neighbors as are willing to do so. When that finally happens, the horror stories and the suffering that we've all witnessed over the last couple of weeks and the last many years will be in the past, and we'll be able to move forward. And that's the world that we are doing what we can in AJC to try to build in partnership with our many friends, and the potential of the friendship between the Jewish people and India, and between Israel and India, and between the United States and India are all so central to the AJC mission, and I am so proud to be a part of that program. And thanks for allowing us to appear in today's important program.
Thank you, Jason. Abhijit, your closing remarks before we end it.
Well, Vaibhav, I think I'll skip closing remarks because I've been playing Israel Defense League out here for the last 2 weeks non-stop on every TV program and YouTube podcast that I can. So, I'll end with Karl Marx's last words, which were, last words are meant for fools who haven't said enough during their lifetime. No more to say. I've said all I have to say.
Thank you, Abhijit. And I would like to say to our viewers that the idea, the reason why I did this program, that because I wanted you to know the reality behind the conflict and how people have, the Palestinian groups like Hamas, how they have been acting in the role of Iran. And because our mainstream media doesn't tell you the reality, they don't show you the facts. They show you what is politically correct according to them. Not to be actually being politically correct. So Israel needs peace more than any country in the region because, and we have seen that Israel evacuated, one of the largest chunks of land won in a war. They returned Sinai. They evacuated it because they wanted to make peace with Egypt. They have always, they have always walked the extra mile to have peace with its neighborhood and all the Muslim world. But what we have seen that the reciprocation has not always been there, and Israelis have always, have been demonized for that, for the failure of peace talks and anything. So just keep your eyes open. Always go for the facts before you believe something. I would always request that go and check what the facts are. Keep watching Defensive Offense. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.